So I've had time to sit down and think about today's announcement with the Commander Advisory Panel unbanning 5 cards, removing 2 cards from the Game Changers list, and adding 18 to the list, including the unbanned cards. Those cards will be going directly into the Game Changers list, giving us a grand total of 23 new cards going on the list. So let's get into this and break down what they wanted to talk about with these cards, why they're unbanning them, and kind of give you my thoughts on if I think this is a good idea, bad idea, or just flat out awful. So to start with, let's talk about the unbannings. 5 cards got unbanned, starting with Gifts Ungiven, Sway of the Stars, Braids Cabal Minion, Coalition Victory, and Panoptic Mirror. Gifts Ungiven is a card that I've felt for a long time now has just kind of outlived itself on being on the ban list because we have access to other tutoring type effects that do similar, if not more powerful things. And on top of that, they never banned Intuition, which is actually coming into the Game Changers list and does a very similar effect. The only difference between the 2 cards is that with Intuition, the opponent chooses what goes into your hand, where Gifts Ungiven, they choose what goes to the graveyard. So I really don't see a huge amount of difference between those 2 cards and why one got banned and one did not. Then we have Sway of the Stars. This is a big mana, mess around type card, which resets the game. I'm not quite sure how this one's going to play out. I don't know that many people are probably going to use it. They compared it to when they unbanned Worldfire, and not a lot of people played that. So I guess we'll see. But if you have this launched against you and it's not countered, it's probably going to result in a fairly miserable game because then everything just gets restarted and everybody has 7 life, and it's just kind of like, eh. So I guess we'll find out. The other cards that will probably cause some misery here is Braids Cabal Minion. Now this one is very iffy. I did a video probably about a year ago where I said they should not unlock Braids from the ban list. So I guess we'll see what happens because they did say that all these things going on the Game Changer list are prime candidates to get a ban if they get out of hand. As with this here, we're talking about Braids in particular. She's a very powerful card that forces everybody to sacrifice something every turn. Now, as part of the 99, she's probably fine in today's formats because there's a lot of things that make people sacrifice things over and over again. The issue becomes when you try to force her out early and you have ways of generating like treasures or something like that where you can just sacrifice those to Braids instead of sacrificing your lands or whatever, while your opponents are stuck sacrificing their lands to keep ahead of this. And that's where things get very miserable. It's going to be one of those things where you're going to have to use the game or Rule Zero conversations to actually set what you expect to happen in a game. And if you sit down with somebody piloting a Braids deck, be prepared for a miserable game. Another card that I don't think should have been unbanned is Coalition Victory. This card is way too easy to set off, and I get a feeling that if enough people decide to start just jamming this in every 5-color deck, from the Tiamats to the Joda, the Unifiers of the world, that it's going to end up getting itself banned again because it's just too easy to set off a Coalition Victory. And that's not hard when you have things like Leyline of the Guild Pact and you have other things that will allow you to change all your land types to the right type. We also have the Overlord of the Hauntwoods, which creates the lands of all types. It's really easy to set off a Coalition Victory, and unless you're sitting in a group that has counter magic or some way to stop this before it gets set off, you're going to just all of a sudden lose the game. And then the last card, of course, that got unbanned is Panoptic Mirror. Now, this one's kind of like, okay, I can see why it probably is okay to unban it. You just, like they talk about in the article, they talk about, you slide a extra turn spell under it, and then the game ends basically there because the person is then going to take infinite turns and eat all the time until they hit their win con and then destroy everybody. It's one of those things, again, Rule Zero conversation. You're going to be like, okay, if you have a Panoptic Mirror, if you have extra turn spells in your deck, 1, you're a dick, and 2, you have to let people know that this is the kind of game you're playing. If you're playing a game where you're jamming time warps and stuff like that under this thing, then they deserve to know what's going to happen with that. And then, as I said at the top of the video, they are changing the list of game changers a little bit. 2 cards are coming off of the Game Changers list, starting off with Trouble in Pairs. This is a card that started off some controversy last year when it was released because the artist who did this actually stole pieces and parts of Donato's art and used those pieces to kind of put it back together and try to claim it as their own. And people found photographic evidence of at least 4, if not 5 different pieces of art that the pieces and parts were stolen from and reconfigured into this art. However, it's been deemed not powerful enough for the Game Changers list and has been removed because of that. It's a really powerful card, but it's just not quite there for what they think constitutes a game changer. The other card that they don't think constitutes one is Trinisphere. Now, this thing, for all its intents and purposes, it sucks to play against this card. Any kind of cheap cantrips and cheap mana stuff you may have, this thing just automatically brings it up to 3 mana to cost. But at the same time, I get where they're coming from. It's really not that hard of a card to get around because, it's only making some things cost more, not everything, and it's not hard for it to be destroyed because it's an artifact, so it's, whatever. Then we have the monster list of 18 new cards being added to the Game Changers list. So I agree with most of this here. This is actually a pretty good set of inclusions and does have a lot of cards here that I originally was like, why are these not on the list? Starting off with Teferi's Protection. This thing is just a bomb and a half card and can swing a game from, oh, you're doomed, you're going to get run over by that crater hoof, you're going to get blown out by that massive fireball, whatever it happens to be, and you are instantly untouchable. There's nothing that can be done. Your life total can't change. They cannot deal damage to you. The only thing that you can actually, get stopped by is a Questing Beast. There is a way to use Questing Beast to get around Teferi's Protection and Commander damage somebody out of the game, but that is very far and few between where you're actually going to be playing against said Commander. The next card up that is in this here is Humility. Now, I totally get it. This card is not one that you're going to see very often because it's on the reserve list and it was only ever printed the one time. However, it is a rules nightmare to deal with because you have to worry about layers in the game of, okay, this was cast first, then the Humility was cast, but then something else might have been laid on top of it that actually does something else that overwrites what the Humility is doing. And there's just a bunch of complications and it causes a game to just kind of slow down to the point where it's like, great, now you got to sit there and pick it apart and figure out what the right layering and everything is. And it's just, it's a card that sucks to deal with. Then also in the sucks to deal with category is Narset, Parter of Veils, and they also lump that in with Orcish Bowmasters and Notion Thief. These are all cards that if you try to wheel somebody with like a Wheel of Fortune or a Windfall or anything like that, these cards punish your opponents very heavily. So like the Notion Thief and allows you to steal those draws for yourself. Narset, Part of Veils just doesn't let them draw the cards at all, so they'll end up having to discard those cards and then get nothing for them except for maybe one card because it's the one card they got to draw off of it for the turn. And then the Bowmasters just ping the ever-living crap out of somebody if you make them draw a bunch of cards. So I can kind of see why these are very powerful. Some of them are very not fun to play against. Narset. And, it's a great thing to see them added to the list. Intuition, as I said earlier in the video, has been added as well. It's very much on par with Gifts Ungiven, and I'm glad to see its inclusion here, and they're both being watched carefully to make sure they don't go crazy, and I'm hoping that if something happens where Gifts Ungiven is, sent back to the list, the Intuition will go with it because they're just too similar of cards in my mind to have one banned and the other one not. Then we have Consecrated Sphinx. This card is a bonkers card. This is one of those things where it's like if you force a wheel on somebody, you're drawing your entire deck. Or if you go ahead and let it live long enough that they're just going to refill their entire hand because in one turn cycle, they've drawn 6 cards because you draw your card for turn, they're drawing 2 more, then the next person, then the next person, so then they get back to their turn and they draw their card. They've drawn 7 cards at the beginning of their first main phase right after this thing's been dropped. So they've reloaded their entire hand and they're ready to roll. So it is definitely a game changer. And then comes the game changer that I thought was absolutely stupid stupid that they left off the list originally, and that is Necropotence. I complained about this in a video, and I have no idea why it wasn't on here to begin with. In a format where we have 40 life to work with and life gain is plentiful, Necropotence is an incredibly busted card because you can pour so much more of your life into it and get so many more cards out of it over time that it's just nuts. Now, they are talking about watching the Necro Dominance card, but they don't think it is quite as bad because you have to wait until the end turn before you can do anything with it. Whereas with Necropotence, if somebody goes to blow it up, you just pay a bunch of life into it right then and there, and then that it's kind of like a floating trigger that at the beginning of the end step, you get to pull those cards regardless if the Necropotence is actually still sitting there on the board. So it's harder to deal with in terms of getting a clutch full of cards if somebody tries to blow it up. Whereas if somebody blows up a Necro Dominance, there's nothing they can do about it. They just lose the card. They can't draw the cards in response or anything like that. They've also added Deflecting SWAT to the list because they've basically put all the free counter magic as game changers like Force of Will, while they consider Deflecting SWAT to be essentially a free counter spell. And I agree with that. That it's a free deterrence for removal of a commander or any other special combo pieces you might have going on. And it does change things because if you're trying to desperately dig for removal, somebody gets that removal and it's swatted away, well, that basically wrecks the game. Now, they are also hitting heavily, and I do mean heavily, a lot of the tutor effects that are out there, such as Gamble, Crop Rotation, Natural Order, and Worldly Tutor. Now, these are just cards that tutor up either specific things or do special effects that can end up creating a big chain effect. And I agree. Gamble is kind of iffy because you have to discard a card at random, so your card might get hit. But they want all this cheap tutoring to be on the list together, and it makes more sense just to go ahead and add it. Whirly Tutor is really good for getting your stuff. Crop Rotation can get any land out of your deck. So if you need something like a Field of the Dead, or if you want your Nykthos or whatever, it's just a great way to get those cards online quickly. Natural Order, you sack a green creature, you go to get a green creature for 4 mana. So you're, let's tutor up a Crater Hoof on turn 5 with a bunch of elves, and you just win the game around the spot. So that's why that's kind of one of those things that they don't want those things happening as often in the lesser power structures of the bracket system. And then we have Food Chain, which I agree with what they've said here. There's really no way to fairly build a Food Chain deck. You're basically chaining it together, as the name implies of the card, to upgrade your creatures and spend more and more mana over and over again to go ahead and power out things as quickly as possible. So it's a very easy to abuse card, and I'm glad to see it hitting the Game Changers list. And then we have another card that's not a ton of fun to play against, and that is Aura Shards. Just having a consistent, surefire way to blow up somebody's enchantments and artifacts just flat out sucks. And there's lots of strategies built specifically around just having lots of enchantments and lots of artifacts. And this card is a backbreaker against those kind of decks. So it's very much worthy of being in consideration as a game changer. And the next card I did mention a little bit with Crop Rotation, and that is Field of the Dead. It's a card that can snowball out of control. This thing has been banned in numerous formats, and it's one of those things that, I don't know, they've banned it, they've unbanned it, they've done all kinds of stuff with it. It is just a busted card, and it's so freaking good. And it's not hard to hit the 7 different lands to start getting a bunch of zombies, and then you have fetch lands, which then can trigger it repeatedly, multiple land plays to go ahead and get it to trigger repeatedly. There's just a lot of ways to make this card go off, and it's nice to see that they actually thought it was strong enough to go on the list. And then Mistress Workshop is sitting here, which I get it. This one's kind of questionable for me. I understand why it's sitting on the list because it's basically 3 free mana, but you can only spend it on artifacts. And on top of that, this is a restricted list card, and it's going for about $2,600 as of this video. So you're not gonna see too many people running this card other than in maybe a proxy tournament. So I'm not quite sure why they had such a big deal over this particular card, but I guess for consistency's sake, it's, whatever. It does tap that. So I guess they're just going to say, okay, it's fast mana. Let's put it on the list. But I kind of don't agree with it being there. And then the last card, I kind of pushed it down the list a little bit because there is a little bit of an issue with this card being on the Game Changer list, and that is Seedborn Muse. Now, I do agree this card probably should have been on the list because it is very powerful, and if you build your deck correctly, you can start playing cards on everybody else's turn because you get to untap all of your stuff on everybody else's untap steps. Very similar to the banned Prophet of Krufix. The only difference is you don't get to play things at flash speed with it, but you can do a build your own Prophet if you have a way to give your stuff flash with like a Ley Line of Anticipation or something like that. This, however, the problem comes is they just included, if you look at the mana symbol, I made sure to grab the right version of the card for my image display here, is from one of the Tarkir Dragonstorm precons. So this thing is in a precon, which I think it's the Abzan Armor precon, and it's able to be used in there, but it's actually a game changer. But if you look at the description of the game changers list, precons are supposed to be core 2 and have no game changers. But they did say that the decision was made on this was well after the finalization, because they finalized the product stuff months in advance to get all the printing and packaging done, and they made this change much more recently. So there wasn't really a way to get around that. So I don't give people too much grief about this card if they're using it because it is in the precon, but I do agree that it should have been on that list to begin with. They also talked about some of the things that they had discussed about adding to the list, such as the other tutors like Court of Calling and stuff like that, but they basically said the rates weren't quite the same as what like Natural Order did, so they didn't want to add it to the list yet. They also talked about the big elephant in the room, which is Soul Ring, which they've basically said once again, forget it. It's not getting banned. It's not getting put on the Game Changers list. There's nothing happening to this card, so get over it. Then, of course, the final thing they talked about was the even larger elephant in the room, which was the not unbanning of the cards that caused the controversy that dissolved the Commander Advisory Group back in the fall, which was the banning of Jeweled Lotus, Dockside Extortionist, and Mana Crypt. Nadu as well, but nobody cares about him. So those things are not coming off the list right now. They are basically saying they're not changing anything else about Commander this year. So for the rest of the year, they're not going to ban or unban anything unless there's an emergency where maybe one of the new cards they just released onto the Game Changers list ends up causing problems and they have to deal with it in advance, or maybe a new card comes out like Nadu did, causes all kinds of grief and they need to get rid of it quickly. Then they said they will take a chance and pull the ripcord on that, but otherwise they're not going to do anything else with the format the rest of this year, and they will revisit those cards later. But for right now, they are not unbanning those cards, so sorry to get your hopes up. And honestly, they need to stay banned for at least a few years, because right now, if they were just to say, yeah, we're going to unban these and put them on the Game Changers list, that would be akin to saying that the threats against the Commander Advisory Group worked. I'm sorry, death threats shouldn't be rewarded. Threats of violence should not be rewarded. And, I'm glad they did not unban those cards at this time. Maybe in the future. And of those ones, I think the only one that might ever have a shot of coming off that list is Jeweled Lotus, only because it is a Commander exclusive card that's only usable in the Commander format the way it's written. So otherwise, I don't want to see any of these cards come back anytime soon. So with that said, what do you guys think of today's announcements? Do you agree with what got added? Is there stuff still missing from the list that they probably should have had added back into the list? Did they leave stuff on there they shouldn't have left on there besides the 2 they took off? I want to know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.